Abigail sank into her couch, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Her body ached from the long hours at the hospital, but her mind couldn't escape the call from her mother earlier. She had tried to shake off the hurt, but it clung to her like a shadow. How could they so casually brush off her struggles, as though she wasn't trying her hardest to make ends meet? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a notification from her credit card app. She opened it without thinking. 4 business class tickets had been charged to her card, totaling over $4,000. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled down to confirm the details. 4 tickets? The only possible explanation was that her family had used her card, again, without her permission. Her mind raced, the anger creeping in slowly but steadily. How could they? This wasn't the first time they'd done this. She felt a familiar heat rising in her chest as she immediately locked her card and disputed the charge. A cold resolve settled over her as she typed out a message to her sister, Kayla, who had been at the forefront of these demands before. Why were these charges on my card? A few minutes later, Kayla responded with a curt reply. What do you mean, the trip's booked? It's already been paid for. Abigail's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. She had every right to feel betrayed, but she needed to keep control of the situation. The days of letting her family take advantage of her had to end. What you said, she hit send, her finger pressing down with finality. Abigail's jaw clenched as she put her phone down and began researching flights for herself. If her family wanted to use her as an ATM, she'd show them that she was done. This was her turning point. She didn't need them to pay for her life anymore. Within minutes, she found a flight to a quiet beach town, somewhere far from the emotional mess her family had become. She booked it immediately. There would be no family vacation for her, not this time. She let out a slow breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. A solo vacation wasn't just an escape, it was a statement. She wasn't going to be their financial lifeline anymore. Abigail stared at the screen as her flight confirmation appeared. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the vacation she had expected to take, but it was the one she needed. Her phone buzzed again. Kayla had replied, her message dripping with annoyance. I'm not sure what you think you're doing, but we've always counted on you. You're just being selfish. Abigail stared at the message for a long time, her heart pounding. Selfish? After everything? She didn't need to explain herself anymore. This time, she wasn't going to let guilt dictate her actions. She took a deep breath and blocked Kayla's number before lying back on the couch. Her mind was already on the trip ahead. For the first time in years, Abigail was taking control of her life, and maybe, just maybe, she could finally stop feeling like a stranger in her own family. She let her eyes close, the faint sound of the ocean in her thoughts as she imagined the freedom waiting for her. Abigail barely slept that night. Her mind was too occupied with thoughts of her family, how they had once again crossed a boundary, taking from her without a second thought. She knew the moment they used her credit card for the plane tickets that this would never stop unless she took control. The sense of betrayal was still fresh, but she couldn't afford to waste any more energy on it. She had a trip to prepare for, a break she desperately needed. Her phone buzzed with the early morning light, but it wasn't a message from Kayla or her mother. Instead, it was an unknown number, and Abigail didn't recognize the area code. Hesitating for a moment, she decided to answer. Hello? Her voice was hoarse, still heavy from sleep. Abigail, her father's voice came through the line, calm but firm. Can we talk? Abigail's heart skipped a beat, but she forced her voice to remain steady. About what? There was a pause, a deep breath, before he continued. Look, I know you're upset, but we're a family and we need your help. The trip to Maui, you can't just pull out on us. Her stomach twisted. Here it comes, she thought. She had known this moment was coming. I don't know what you mean, Abigail said carefully. She already felt the familiar tug of guilt trying to rise up inside her, but she quickly silenced it. I've already booked my own trip. Her father sighed heavily. Abigail, this is about us, your family. You've always been the one who helped out, who made sure we were okay. You can't just turn your back on us now. The trip's expensive. It's a lot of money, and we were counting on you to help us cover it. Abigail's pulse quickened, her grip tightening on her phone. They were counting on me. I'm not turning my back on anyone, she said coldly. I'm simply setting a boundary. I've been carrying this family for too long. You and Mom both know how much I've sacrificed, and yet here you are, asking for more, again. Don't do this, Abigail. We need you. You're the only one who can help. Please, just come through for us this once. The frustration that had been simmering for years finally boiled over, and Abigail was no longer able to keep it down. She stood up, pacing across her living room, fighting the urge to snap. I don't owe you anything, she said sharply, her voice stronger now. You've used me for years, and I'm done. This isn't about money anymore. You're not entitled to my sacrifices just because you're family. You want me there? You better learn how to take care of yourselves. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, her father's breath coming heavier, the realization of her rejection settling in. Abigail, you don't mean this, he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. I do, she replied, her words solid and final. And you need to accept that. I'm done being your financial savior. Abigail hung up without waiting for a response, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. Her father hadn't even tried to argue. He had always been the one to make her feel like she owed him everything. But this time, she stood firm. She felt the weight of the years of emotional manipulation lift slightly, but it was replaced with something else, something sharper, a new clarity. She was done with the guilt, done with the obligations. As the phone call ended, she realized she was finally beginning to break free from the narrative her family had forced her into. Abigail walked to her window and looked out at the bustling city below. The life she had built for herself, separate from her family, had been waiting for her all along. It was time to move forward, to stop being the person they had always depended on. It was time to focus on her own life, her own needs, and for the first time in years, Abigail felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about finally choosing herself. When she heard the knock at the door a few moments later, she didn't flinch. She knew exactly who it was. Her father had come to speak to her in person, but this time, Abigail was ready. She didn't answer the door. She let him stand there, knocking, before walking back to the couch. There was nothing more to say. She was done. Abigail stared out the window of her apartment, the city lights twinkling below. The quiet hum of the night surrounded her, but her mind was anything but quiet. The events of the past few days were unraveling in her mind, piece by piece. The phone call from her mother, the unauthorized charges on her credit card, and now the confrontation with her father. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Her family had been taking advantage of her for years. As a child, she had always been expected to give. Whether it was covering for a broken appliance when her parents were behind on bills, or co-signing loans for her sister Kayla, Abigail had always been the one to step up, to save the day. The weight of responsibility was something she had grown used to, even though she hated it. She had spent her entire life trying to keep everyone afloat, but no one had ever bothered to do the same for her. It was always the same pattern. Her mother would ask for help with some urgent financial matter. Her father would say he'd figure it out, and Kayla would be in the middle of another one of her self-inflicted crises. And no matter how much Abigail gave, no one ever said thank you. They just kept asking for more. Her gaze moved to the kitchen table, where a pile of receipts and bank statements lay untouched. Each one was a reminder of how much she had spent over the years, money that had disappeared into her family's demands without a single question asked. It was as if they had a permanent claim on her, one she had never been able to shake. I've been taken for granted for so long, she thought bitterly. Abigail's mind wandered back to the conversation with her mother when she had dropped the bombshell about not attending the family trip. Her mother had dismissed her financial struggles so casually, as if they were a minor inconvenience, and that, more than anything, had hurt her the most. The idea that her family didn't even see her sacrifices, didn't even appreciate them, felt like the final slap in the face. You understand, her mother had said, but I promised I'd watch Kayla's kids this weekend. That phrase stuck with Abigail like a splinter, digging deeper with each passing thought. It wasn't just that her mother had chosen her sister over her once again, it was the casualness with which she said it. No consideration for Abigail's exhaustion after long hospital shifts, no recognition of the personal toll it took to keep everything together. Her mother was so consumed with her own needs that she couldn't see the burden she placed on Abigail. Frustration bubbled up within her. All these years, all this time, her family had taken from her without hesitation, without a second thought, and every time she had tried to assert herself, every time she had tried to say no, they had guilt-tripped her back into compliance. Her mother, her father, Kayla, they were also skilled at it, but Abigail was done being their emotional and financial crutch. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It was time to face the truth. The weight of this realization was heavy, but it was necessary. Her family had never seen her, really seen her, not as someone who could be relied on for help, but as a person with needs, with limits. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being the one who held everything together while they walked around pretending everything was fine. Enough. Abigail had always hoped that one day they would see her for who she was, that they would realize the sacrifices she had made, but as the years had gone by, she realized it wasn't going to happen. No matter how much she gave, no matter how much she did, her family saw her as nothing more than an ATM. The breaking point had come, finally, and she was done. She took one last look at the pile of receipts. It was time to let go of the past, time to stop being the family's financial savior, time to stop letting them drain her dry. She had a right to live her life, to take care of herself. As she grabbed her coat and keys, Abigail felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she was stepping into it on her own terms. No more manipulation, no more guilt. It was her time now. Abigail sat at her desk, the room quiet around her. The hum of the city outside was barely noticeable as she focused on the task in front of her. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her own life. The thought of writing the invoice had come to her as a sudden, sharp realization. She wasn't going to allow her family to walk all over her anymore. She opened her laptop, the familiar glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she gathered her thoughts. She had always been the one to help, to provide, to shoulder the burden for everyone else. And what had she received in return? Nothing but more demands, more expectations. It was time to put an end to that. Taking a deep breath, she began typing, invoice for financial assistance provided to Kayla, sister, mom, dad, and all concerned parties. This is a formal invoice detailing the financial assistance I have provided over the years, including interest and late fees for unpaid debts. Below is a summary of the amounts I have lent, gifted, and covered for family expenses, family vacation contribution, Maui trip, $4,000 Kayla's unpaid debts, credit cards, loans, $6,000 emergency family expenses, including vehicle repairs, medical bills, $12,500 miscellaneous family contributions, unpaid mortgages, bills, $15,000 total amount, $37,500 interest, 15% annual, $5,625 late fees, accumulated 2 years, $1,200 total, due $44,325. Abigail sat back and reread the document. There was no remorse. This was the right thing to do. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, and with one click, the invoice was sent to her family's group chat. She could already picture the responses coming in. Her mother, no doubt, would call her petty. Kayla would probably accuse her of being a bad person. But this wasn't about being liked anymore. It was about standing up for herself, for the first time in her life. The message was sent, and Abigail leaned back in her chair, feeling a strange mix of relief and excitement. She had finally taken action. It wasn't revenge. It was simply a demand for respect. And if they didn't like it, that was their problem. Her phone buzzed within moments. It was a text from Kayla. Kayla, are you seriously doing this? You're being ridiculous. We've been through a lot lately, and you're making everything worse. Stop being petty. Abigail didn't hesitate. She responded coldly, her words sharp and final. Abigail, what you said, it was as if the words had weight to them now, like a door had closed firmly behind her. She was done. No more running to their rescue. No more playing the role they had cast her in. The family's emotional manipulation had worked for too long, but it wasn't going to work anymore. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. Mom, Abigail, what's wrong with you? We're family. You don't just send an invoice like this. Do you really think this is the right way to handle this? Her heart fluttered in her chest, but this time, There was no hesitation. She didn't feel the familiar guilt rising. Instead, she felt empowered. She locked her phone and pushed it aside, rising from her desk and walking to the window. The world outside looked different now. The sun had set, but she felt as though a new light had come into her life, a light she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Abigail walked back to her desk and grabbed her phone again. She opened the travel app on her phone, her fingers tapping quickly as she began booking a solo trip to a beach town, far from the noise of her family's demands. The calm she craved was just a plane ride away. She smiled to herself as she clicked confirm. There would be no more guilt, no more obligations. Her family would have to adjust, just as she had learned to do over the years. Abigail was finally reclaiming her life, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace with the decision. Abigail's phone buzzed incessantly over the next few hours. Her family had gone into full crisis mode. Each text was a fresh attempt to guilt her into reversing her decision. Each call an effort to reel her back into the fold. They were relentless. Her heart ached with the familiar pressure, but this time, she didn't give in. This time, she was firm. Mom, you know we're struggling, right? You've always helped us. But now you're acting like we're strangers. You're making this a bigger issue than it needs to be. Kayla, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're ruining everything. This isn't about money. You've been selfish. Dad. Abigail, please. Your family. Don't do this. We need your help. You can't just cut us off like this. Abigail sat in her apartment, staring at the screen of her phone. Each message felt like a dagger, but she stood her ground. You can't have everything from me, she thought. Not anymore. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. It would have been so easy to slip back into the role they had forced her into over the years, the selfless, ever-giving sister, daughter, and the family's financial safety net. But this time, something inside her had snapped. I'm tired, she thought. Tired of always being the one who bends until I break. She knew what was coming next. The phone calls would keep coming, the texts would pile up, the guilt would rain down. But for once, she wasn't going to pick up the phone. She wasn't going to answer. The first few hours felt like an eternity. Her phone buzzed, then stopped, then buzzed again. She put it on silent, left it on the counter, and turned her attention elsewhere. Anything to distract herself from the nagging voice in her head that wondered if she was making the right choice. Then the doorbell rang. Abigail froze. Her pulse quickened, and her first instinct was to ignore it. But after a moment, she found herself walking toward the door. When she opened it, she found her father standing there, his face creased with concern, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. Dad? Abigail's voice was tired. The words didn't come easy. He looked at her, his expression softening as he met her gaze. We need to talk. Abigail didn't step aside. She didn't invite him in. She just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, silently waiting for him to speak. He took a deep breath, rubbing his face. Abigail, please, you can't just walk away from us. You've always helped out before. You can't leave us hanging now. This trip, everything, it's just too much. I'm not leaving anyone hanging, Abigail said quietly. I've been helping for years, but I can't do this anymore. Her father took a step closer, his eyes pleading now. This is your family, Abby. We need you. We've always needed you. You can't just turn your back on us. Abigail took a step back, her heart heavy but resolute. I've spent my whole life trying to make sure you all were okay. Every time you needed something, I was there, but you've never once asked how I'm doing. I'm not just the person who cleans up your messes, Dad. I'm a person too. Her father's face hardened, but only for a moment. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. I didn't realize you felt this way. Well, now you do, Abigail replied, her voice low but firm. She took another step back, her arms uncrossing. I'm not going to keep enabling this, and I'm not going to keep sacrificing my life for everyone else. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her father looked at her with a mix of sadness and frustration, and for the first time in years, Abigail felt no need to fix it. To make him understand, she didn't owe him an explanation anymore. She didn't need him to approve. I'm not changing my mind, she said, her voice steady. I'm going on my own trip, and I'm going to start putting myself first for once. Her father stared at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Abigail standing in the doorway. The weight of the years of this dynamic suddenly felt lighter, as if her father's departure marked the beginning of something new. She closed the door behind him. Standing there for a moment, the silence settling in, there was no guilt, no pressure, just a quiet sense of victory. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she didn't even glance at it. She wasn't looking for their approval anymore. The familiar burden of their demands felt distant, like a cloud on the horizon that she no longer had to chase. Abigail let out a slow breath, the knot in her chest loosening. And finally, for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She was free. Abigail sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the phone in her hand. The message from Marissa, Derek's ex-wife, had left her reeling. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't even known what to expect. But Marissa's email had changed everything. It was a mix of shock and vindication that flooded Abigail. For years, she had suspected there was something off about the way her family managed money, the way Derek's behavior had never been questioned, and how the burden always seemed to fall on her. But now, with the evidence Marissa had sent, she could see the full picture. Derek's gambling had drained their funds, and to cover it up, her family had been using her financially. They'd been funneling money from joint accounts, hiding his mismanagement under the guise of emergencies, and then expecting Abigail to step in whenever they were short. The documents she'd received were damning: bank statements, screenshots of money transfers, and even some hastily written notes that seemed to confirm her suspicions. Derek hadn't just been irresponsible, he had been a financial drain on the entire family, and Abigail had unknowingly been supporting his wreckage. It was like a dark cloud had been lifted, but there was a sharp sting in its place. How had she been so blind? How had they all let her be the one to cover up their mess? As she sat there, digesting everything, the phone rang again. This time, it was Marissa calling. Abigail hesitated before answering, unsure of what to say or how to feel. But the truth had been laid out so plainly, it seemed pointless to hide anymore. "Hello?" "Abigail," Marissa's voice was cautious but firm. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I wanted you to have the full picture. Derek's gambling, his debts. It's been draining everyone, and I know you've been helping, but I don't think you understand just how deep this goes." "I don't," Abigail said quietly. Her mind was still reeling, "but I think I'm starting to." Marissa sighed, the sound heavy with regret. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I never wanted you to be part of the fallout, but your family, especially your dad, keeps covering for him. They're all stuck in this web, and I wanted you to know so you can make your own choices, free from the lies." Abigail ran a hand through her hair. The anger had been simmering inside her, but now it felt like something else was beginning to rise. Relief. For years she had felt like something wasn't right, like her sacrifices were never enough, no matter how much she gave. Now she knew why. They had used her. Her family had leaned on her to hide Derek's irresponsibility. "It's not your fault," Abigail finally said, her voice steady now, despite the chaos inside her. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it all." "I understand," Marissa said softly, "but you need to do something about it, Abigail. Derek has ruined everything, and your family has used you to clean up his mess. They need to face the truth. You shouldn't have to keep supporting them. You need to expose what's been going on, so they can't keep pulling you into this anymore." Abigail sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. She had spent so many years trying to fix things for everyone else, to be the one who saved the day, but now she realized it was time for the truth to come out. It was time to stop being the family's fall guy. "I'm going to report it," Abigail said, her voice resolute. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what's been going on. Derek can't keep hiding behind my back, and neither can the rest of them." Marissa was quiet for a moment, but then she spoke with a quiet, urgent intensity. "It's the right thing to do, Abigail. You've given enough. It's time for them to take responsibility." Abigail didn't feel anger anymore, not toward Marissa and not toward Derek. It was all directed inward now, at the way her family had treated her, at how they had expected her to always cover their mistakes, at how they had never seen her for who she was, just the one who could always be relied on, the one who would pay when they couldn't. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle into her chest. "I'm doing this. I'm not going to keep paying for their lies." Later that evening, Abigail gathered the evidence Marissa had sent her, carefully organizing it before sending an anonymous report to the authorities. She didn't want revenge. This wasn't about punishing her family. It was about stopping the cycle of manipulation and financial ruin. As she hit send, Abigail felt a mix of empowerment and fear. She was exposing the truth, not just about Derek, but about her entire family's deceit. For so long, she had let them take from her, both emotionally and financially. But that was over now. She stared at her phone, the screen reflecting her tired face. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of her family's expectations crushing her. She was finally taking back control. And with that, she realized she was beginning to reclaim her life. Abigail had barely started her day when the voicemail came through. She had just finished her breakfast, her mind focused on the plan she had set for herself, another step toward rebuilding her life. The last thing she expected was her father's voice on the other end of the phone, sounding softer than she remembered. "Abigail, it's me," he said, his voice laced with something she hadn't heard in years: vulnerability. "I know things have been hard between us, but I really think we need to talk. You've been distant lately and, well, I think we can work things out. Please, let's not let this go too far." For a split second, Abigail felt a pang of something, guilt maybe, or a flicker of the old hope she had clung to for so long. She had wanted this, wanted him to finally acknowledge the years of emotional distance, to realize how much she had sacrificed. But now, it felt different. She had changed. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the phone in her hand. The realization hit her like a wave. This was not an apology. It was a plea. A desperate attempt to regain control over her, to make her feel guilty for setting boundaries. Abigail didn't return the call. Instead, she set her phone down with a deep sigh and took a moment to gather her thoughts. No more playing along. No more being the one who sacrifices for everyone else. This time, it was about her. She had made the decision weeks ago when she'd exposed Derek's financial mismanagement, and she wasn't going to back down now. Her family had used her for far too long, and while this message sounded like her father was trying to mend things, she knew it wasn't about her. It was about them. She stood up, her fingers tapping against her desk as she thought through the next step. The truth had to come out, but she wasn't going to settle for simply being their scapegoat. Derek had already gotten away with too much. Now, it was time to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. With cold determination, Abigail opened her laptop and pulled up the documents that Marissa had sent her. She had kept everything, every screenshot, every bank transfer, every piece of evidence that showed how her family had been complicit in hiding Derek's fraud. This was the final piece of the puzzle. She gathered her thoughts, carefully attaching the documents to an email. Then, she paused. For a moment, she considered the impact this might have on her family, but the thought quickly passed. Her father had used her for years, just like the rest of them. He had to understand the consequences of his actions. Abigail took a deep breath and clicked send, sending the files to his employer. The email was anonymous. She didn't need her name attached. She didn't need them to know it was her who had exposed the truth. All she needed was for it to reach the right people, for someone to see the pattern of deceit her family had been hiding for far too long. She closed the laptop with a quiet satisfaction and leaned back in her chair. This was it. She had finally done what she'd been avoiding for years, cut ties and refused to enable them any longer. She wasn't their emotional safety net. She wasn't going to be the one who cleaned up their mess anymore. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from her mother. "Mom, you've gone too far this time, Abigail. You've hurt your father, and for what? Is this how you repay the family who gave you everything?" Abigail stared at the screen for a moment, her heart no longer racing with guilt. It had been a long time coming, this moment of finality. She didn't need her mother's approval. She didn't need her family's validation. What they had done to her for years wasn't her fault, and it wasn't her responsibility to fix them. She responded with one simple message. "I'm done." Abigail set her phone down and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The emotional weight she had carried for years was finally lifting. There was no more manipulation, No more financial burden. She had broken free from the cycle that had defined her relationship with her family. As the hours passed, Abigail's phone remained silent. She didn't know what would come next, but she no longer felt the need to anticipate it. Whatever happened, she was ready. This was her life now, and for the first time, it was truly her own. It had been a few months since Abigail had made the choice to cut ties with her family. In that time, she had begun a slow but steady process of rebuilding her life, her boundaries, and most importantly, her sense of self. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had separated herself from the emotional and financial chaos her family had created, and she was starting to thrive. Abigail sat at her kitchen table one morning, sipping coffee and watching the world outside her window. The sun was peeking over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the city streets. The feeling of peace that settled inside her was unfamiliar but welcome. For the first time in years, her thoughts weren't clouded by guilt or the looming responsibility of her family's needs. She was free. The therapy sessions had helped. She was learning to give herself permission to not be everything to everyone, to put herself first without apology. Her therapist had suggested journaling to track her progress, and she had done just that, documenting her feelings, her moments of growth, and the small victories that reminded her she was on the right path. Abigail smiled as she flipped through the pages of her journal. The entries were filled with reflections on boundaries, lessons learned, and the joy of rediscovering things that had been buried beneath years of familial obligations. Simple things like cooking new recipes, taking long walks, and even learning how to enjoy time alone were now part of her routine. These moments, once rare and fleeting, were now cherished and part of her healing process. But it wasn't just the small victories that marked her rebirth. Abigail had started dating again. After months of focusing solely on herself, she met David, a man who valued her for who she was, not for what she could give. He wasn't like the others. He didn't see her as someone who needed to sacrifice for those around her. He loved her independence, admired her strength, and treated her with the respect she had never fully received from her family. Their relationship grew naturally, and for the first time in a long time, Abigail found herself smiling at the thought of her future. It was during one of their evening walks that David had brought up the topic of her family, carefully testing the waters. "I know this is a tough subject, but how are you feeling about everything now?" Abigail paused, looking out at the skyline. The question didn't sting anymore, though it once might have. "Honestly, I'm doing better. I thought I'd feel more regret, but I don't. I think I've made the right choice." David nodded, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You've done a lot for them, but you've got to put yourself first now, and it looks like you're doing that." Her smile was soft but sincere. "Yeah, it's still hard sometimes, but I'm learning to take care of myself." As they continued their walk, Abigail felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The past was starting to feel distant, like an old story she no longer needed to carry. She had reclaimed her life, not by waiting for her family's approval, but by choosing herself. She didn't need them to understand her decisions anymore. She didn't need their validation. At home, she sat down to plan the next chapter of her life. There was so much she still wanted to explore. New hobbies, career opportunities, and maybe even travel to new places, just for the sake of discovering more about herself. But for now, she was content with where she was. She had spent years focusing on others, but now it was her turn to create a life she loved. The phone buzzed on the table, but Abigail didn't jump to answer it. She had learned not to react to every text or call, especially not from her family. It was a message from Marissa, the one person who had remained supportive of Abigail's decisions. "Marissa, I heard from Derek's ex-wife. She's doing okay, and I finally let go of the past. Thank you for helping me see the truth about him." "You've always been strong, Abigail, even when I couldn't see it." Abigail read the message with a quiet smile. The weight she had carried for so long, trying to keep everyone together, was no longer hers to bear. She had chosen to help others when she could, but it was no longer at the expense of her own happiness. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her mother. "Mom, we miss you. Can we talk soon?" Abigail stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. She felt the old pull, the old desire to explain herself, to make them understand, but she didn't owe them an explanation anymore. She responded with a simple text, something she had never been able to say before. I'm good. I'm focusing on my own life now. I hope you understand. She sent it and sat back in her chair. There would be no more guilt, no more trying to fit into a mold they had created for her. The door to her past was closing, and she felt lighter with every step forward. As she closed her phone and moved on to her next task, Abigail smiled. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and she realized, as she did, that true closure had never been about her family coming to her. It had always been about her coming to terms with the fact that she didn't need them to define who she was. She was whole, just as she was, and that, in itself, was a victory. In this new chapter, Abigail was free. Abigail sat at her kitchen table, the soft hum of the city around her, but her mind was quiet. The peace she had found in herself over the past few months was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. For the first time in years, she wasn't chasing after anyone's approval, least of all her family's. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Kayla. Abigail hesitated before opening it. She had expected this, one last attempt at pulling her back into their cycle of manipulation. Kayla, I know I haven't been the best sister. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry. I really need you to come back. Please, I miss you. Abigail stared at the screen for a long moment. She knew what it was, another attempt to guilt her into playing the role they had cast her in for so long. She wasn't angry anymore, not even hurt. She just felt indifferent. She had heard this before, seen it before. It was all the same. Her family only wanted her when they needed something, and when she had nothing left to give, they left her to pick up the pieces. Abigail, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I can't keep doing this. I'm moving forward, and I need to do it on my own terms. She hit send without hesitation. The message felt final, like the last of a chapter closing, and with it, any lingering hope she'd had that they might change. She didn't need their apology anymore. She didn't need to hear their reasons or excuses. She had already moved on. The doorbell rang shortly after. Abigail sighed, bracing herself. Her mother had sent a check in the mail a few days ago, a last-ditch attempt to regain some kind of control over her. Maybe you'll change your mind when you see this, her mother had written in a note. Abigail didn't know what she expected from her family anymore. Money wasn't the issue. It never had been. She opened the door and found the envelope resting on the porch, the same familiar handwriting from her mother. With a deep breath, Abigail picked it up and closed the door behind her. Inside the envelope was a check for an absurd amount of money, more than she had ever wanted or needed from them. She read the accompanying note. I know you'll be mad, but I'm hoping this will show you how much we care. Please don't turn your back on us completely. Abigail held the check in her hand, a deep, quiet sense of finality settling in her chest. It was a symbol of everything they had used her for, a payoff, disguised as concern. It wasn't love, it was manipulation, pure and simple. She didn't even need to think about it. With a steady hand, she wrote a note of her own. Thank you for the gesture, but I'm donating this to a scholarship fund. There are people who need it more than I do. Please don't contact me again. She sealed the check in an envelope and placed it in the mailbox. It was done, all of it. Abigail sat back down at her kitchen table, staring out the window. The city was still moving, the world still turning. But for her, everything had changed. This wasn't a victory over her family. It wasn't about making them pay for the years of manipulation. It was about her reclaiming the life they had never let her live. She didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. She felt calm, at peace. The kind of peace that came with knowing she had done what was right for herself. She glanced at her phone, where a new message from Marissa had come through. The message was simple, just a few words. I'm proud of you. Abigail smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. Marissa had been the one person who had never expected anything from her but honesty. She had seen Abigail for who she truly was, not as someone to exploit, but as a friend, someone worthy of love and respect. Abigail sent a quick response, her fingers tapping out the words she had never been able to say to her family. Thank you. I think I'm finally starting to live for myself. She put the phone down and stood up, moving to the window again. The light was beginning to fade, the city streets growing quiet, and Abigail felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She had done the hard work of breaking free, and in doing so, she had freed herself. For the first time in her life, she realized that closure wasn't about getting her family's understanding or approval. It wasn't about fixing everything or making them see her worth. It was about accepting that she didn't need their validation to be whole. She had learned to validate herself, and that, more than anything, was the most liberating feeling in the world. With that thought, Abigail turned away from the window and smiled. The future was hers now, and it looked brighter than it had ever been.